Okay, it is 12 o'clock, so we are going to get started. Welcome everyone to our webinar on community partnerships and creative spaces featuring Carousel players. My name is Alex Glass and I'm the Interim Executive Director at ArtsBuild Ontario. We are very pleased to have our guest presenter, Kate Leathers, General Manager at Carousel Players, here today to speak with us. Before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping items to go through. And if you are a usual participant in our webinars, you will know these off by heart by now. But you can hear us, but we can't hear you. Your microphones have been disabled for this webinar, but you can use your speakers or headphones to listen in. And you can adjust the sound by clicking on the speaker icon at the top of the meeting room. We'll be offering closed captioning throughout the webinar today. The closed captioning will be happening at the bottom of the screen where participants can change the font type, size, and color. I'd just like to ask one participant in the meeting room today using the chat box function at the bottom right of our meeting room if it's working. And David, I think you're acknowledging that it is working. Can others just type a quick yes? Oh, perfect. Thank you, David. A couple more things. We will be recording this session, so we'll email it out to you once the webinar has completed today. We'll also email you a quick survey. So we like to evaluate all of our programs all the time to make sure that we're responding to the current needs of our sector around creative spaces. So your time around this is very important and we appreciate your feedback. It should just take you 5 minutes to do. And then moving on. Our introduction. So a little bit about the learning series in ArtsBuild Ontario before we really dig into the presentation. I also want to tell you a little bit about the webinar today and what you can expect to hear, and some background information on our guest presenter. So ArtsBuild Ontario is a nonprofit arts service organization that provides programs and learning opportunities that help make Ontario's creative spaces more sustainable. So we have a few core programs like mentoring, asset management, Space Finder, I'll talk about that later, and then we have projects. So again, responding to the needs of our current creative spaces, we like to tell you about what we're working on so we can better support you. The Learning Series is one of our programs that we offer too. This is a series of webinars that supports online professional development for arts managers around the topic of creative space projects. All of our webinars are available online, so we record all of them and then we post them after we're done, and you're welcome to access them for free at any point. And feel free to share it with any staff or your board members or any colleagues that you think might benefit as well. This webinar today highlights Carousel Players' space transition as they went from 1 space to 3. Carousel Players once operated out of the municipally owned The Old Courthouse in St. Catharines for a number of years, but needed to find a new home or homes as the first Ontario Performing Arts Centre neared completion. Kate will share their story on how they forged new partnerships with the faith, post-secondary, and cultural sectors to find multiple spaces to fit their organizational needs and for other theater companies in need of performance and rehearsal space. The webinar will focus on community partnerships, evolution of cultural infrastructure in a community, and the successes and challenges of operating out of multiple spaces. I would like to now introduce our guest presenter for today, Kate Leathers. Kate has worked in the cultural sector for 25 years. As an administrator, project manager, and production technician, she's worked for dozens of theaters, art galleries, and cultural organizations across Canada. Kate's artistic management practice includes projects in multiple disciplines and consultancy work with the firm Janice A. Barlow and Associates and private clients. She's currently in her 5th season with Carousel Players, Niagara's only professional touring theater for young audiences. She has managed small and large visual and digital arts projects, consulted on financial and strategic planning for arts organizations across North America, and served in managerial roles on performance events ranging from community arts workshops to multi-day, multidiscipline events. Kate has lived in the Niagara region for 15 years and works to support the local arts sector growth by acting as a resource for artists and arts companies in need of assistance with financial and project planning, technical advice, and preparing funding applications. In 2013, she led the Niagara Arts Service Alliance research project and exploration of the needs and challenges for arts organizations across Niagara and developed a model for an arts service organization for the region. Kate holds a BA in drama from Bishop's University and an MBA from McMaster University. As part of her graduate studies, she acted as a researcher and consultant for performing arts organization in the areas of public relations, organizational communication, marketing, communications planning, and brand management. For non-arts clients, she was involved in market research into consumer perceptions and behavior and performed organizational strategic planning. Kate is currently the general manager of Carousel Players. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our presenter, Kate.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you very much for the generous introduction. It's always weird hearing your own history repeated back to you. I'm just going to talk now a little bit about our company, Carousel Players. Carousel is, as mentioned, a theater for young audiences company. So we perform pieces exclusively created for children, primarily ages 4 to 14, all the way up to 18. And we work almost entirely on the road. So talking about facilities is a little odd for a company that tours, but of course we all need places to create our work and to manage them from. So that is where Carousel Players has had its facility journey in the last few years. Since 1972, Carousel Players has been on the road. We have been in the schools, and we have been interested in having our own theater. Of course, the original tours were happening in a nice big van, and they were operating out of ad hoc spaces like a decommissioned wing of a school, community halls. And over the decades, it became very clear that the company needed its own permanent facility to create, to produce, to have a space for administration, and to teach, because we work with young people and sharing drama education is part of our mandate. So in the early 2000s, Carousel Players, with the support of the Ontario Trillium Foundation, Niagara Community Foundation, a lot of donors, sponsors, groups from the community, we were able to open our own theater. This was the Sullivan Manny Courthouse Theater. It's in a heritage building right in the core of downtown St. Catharines. It's a gorgeous building, and it was the original courthouse of the region, I believe the county for St. Catharines. So we built our theater in the original courtroom of the county that encompasses St. Catharines. The final format of the theater, as you can see, there's a number of different sketches here, a preliminary, and then our final format here. It had 3 administrative offices. It had this beautiful theater, rehearsal hall, production storage up in the attic for entire sets. We even had a sublet space that other arts organizations were able to rent for office and meeting space. And of course, the community theater here, which seated 100 or 100 plus people. It had a full truss rig. It had full lighting and sound. So that was our space. As of 2003, it opened, and the company operated out of there for many years. Over those years, the use of the space by Carousel was, of course, our productions and our education programs, but as well, it was a space that was used by other arts groups in the community. I did a count recently, and it was more than 25 different user groups over the duration of the facility's life. They would use it for performances and special events. Some of these groups hosted their very earliest performances in the courthouse and are now, years later, established companies with core operating funding from multiple levels of government. So that's companies like Suitcase and Point or Essential Collective Theatre, which are two now established companies that had their start with performances at this theater. Other companies like the Niagara Symphony, which has been around even longer than Carousel Players, would come into the courthouse to have performances in a smaller, more community-connected space. So it was a very vibrant and busy space. It's a gorgeous heritage building, which of course brings its own challenges. One of the biggest ones was accessibility. We were located on the second floor, and there is no elevator in the building, so that was definitely one of the major drawbacks to the space. Like all old buildings, it also had old systems in it. So the heating and cooling systems were not always the greatest. And of course, that's such a major expense that the municipal owner of the facility was always struggling to keep up with upkeep, as you are in old buildings. We also had some problems we were aware with some vermin and all of those challenges that come with a century plus old building. The other thing that happened with the courthouse is, of course, as Alex mentioned, the city of St. Catharines committed to building a modern performing arts center for the city, one that could encompass all the different sizes of audiences and performance that are in demand in our city and our region. This facility was conceived to have a hall for the symphony, a larger hall than they were performing in. It had a black box space in the concept of recital hall. And the potential users of this facility were brought together well in advance of its construction to discuss how the space could meet our needs and provide all of the facility requirements that we all had as different disciplines of performance, as different sizes of companies. There was considerable consultation over the years. Many elements were requested, and they would a lot of them would have been replacements or upgrades from what existed in Carousel space. So that's rehearsal, storage, administrative space, that sort of thing. Unfortunately, as we all know with large facility projects, some of these elements were removed during the planning process due to the cost of building a multi-space facility. In the final building, the finished facility, there were spaces for performance, but really nothing else that was of use to Carousel in terms of the other facility needs we had: rehearsal, production, administration. So it was difficult when, once the Performing Arts Center opened, the city made it clear that the Courthouse Theater, which was in a city-owned facility, would need to close. It's understandable logic that there was a new accessible theater with a similar seat count that groups could use instead. Unfortunately, for Carousel players, the rent that we received from our user groups made up a good chunk of the rent we paid to our municipal landlord, and the loss of that rent was not being matched by a reduction in our rent on the building. So it was time to move. So we moved to many spaces. And this is just a very quick illustration of our spaces. This map down here at the bottom is, it shows you some of the spaces where we ended up: administration, rehearsal and storage, performance, and workshops, and what some of them look like inside. This move to this multi-use space model, this was led by the then general manager of the company, Jane Gardner, the artistic director at the time, Jessica Carmichael, myself. I was at the time the production manager. We were also supported by a subcommittee of our board, the facilities committee, which was made up of people who either came from an architectural or facility operation background, or of people who were in the arts sector and were aware of the needs not just of Carousel players, but of other arts groups who used our space. We also were working with a group called Leadership Niagara, which was a group drawn from business professionals in the region who were interested in assisting nonprofit organizations. And they were very helpful with their outside perspective to help in terms of helping us focus in on priorities and asking useful questions and sort of poking at those assumptions that we were making and making sure that they were strong, or maybe that they needed to be shifted. So that was our team that took us to the many spaces here that you see. The reason we have many spaces is that we have very strong partnerships. That was something that began even before we knew we were moving, was to evolve these partnerships with community organizations who had space, but also who had an interest in supporting the arts sector. So we have here our Silver Spire United Church, which is at the top of the list because they eventually became the home of our administrative space. But this is a church and a congregation that has made the arts one of the three pillars of its mandate within the community. So they value supporting the arts community on par with their social justice work and their faith work. And as a result, when they have spare facility, they use it to support those the social justice and the arts. So we are lucky enough to have a wonderful administrative space within their building. The second partner that we worked very closely with, particularly led by Jessica Carmichael and Jane, who actually sat on the board of the Folk Arts for a brief period. This organization, they have two buildings in the downtown core, one of which is a former school, an assembly hall, and it's a wonderfully large space. And so they worked with us to install our theater in the basement of that assembly hall, in a hall that was smaller than the original courthouse theater, but large enough that performances can be held there. And so we were able to maintain a performance space for those companies that wanted a small incubator space and weren't quite ready for the large performance spaces of the Performing Arts Center. They also supported us with storage space and rehearsal space in their larger hall. The Folk Arts Center is a cultural and settlement organization. So supporting culture is part of their mandate, and part of the reason why we partnered with them was so that the theater could be that we created and our knowledge of performance could be connected with the cultural groups that work within their umbrella organization. It was also because they do a lot of work with youth, and our mandate of theater for young people strongly connects with engaging young people in creative programs. So we wanted to be able to make a connection through their youth programs as well. The Marilyn I. Walker School of Fine and Performing Arts is the new campus that was built in the downtown core, right behind the down the hill from the Performing Arts Center. It's a state-of-the-art facility that has quite a number of workshop studios, or studios that we think of as workshop studios, and a beautiful black box theater space. We arranged through connections that we already had with the Brock University Drama Program to exchange a number of the chairs from our theater, which were no longer needed, for the use of workshop space in their studios for a 3-year period. It was an excellent arrangement because it's a facility that understands and is equipped to support new play development, because they have just the large open space and the availability that we needed that is often difficult to find. So they were an important partner in maintaining that part of our mandate. And of course, the first Ontario Performing Arts Centre, which is the Municipal Performing Arts Centre, was our performance space. So for the first year, we were a rental client of the Performing Arts Centre. And since that time, we've actually switched over. Our relationship is now not through a partnership like that. We are now a presented artist within their system. So it's a slightly different relationship now, but the very first year that we worked with them, it was as a rental client. So those were the main spaces that we occupied. The journey to get to some of these partnerships was easier in some cases because we had existing relationship with the drama department at Brock and with the staff at the Arts Center. And some of these were very new relationships that were with Silver Spire Church and the folk arts particularly. We had not had a chance to work with them before. So there was a long period of building trust and establishing common goals and making sure that we were actually headed in the same direction. That began in the fall of 2015 before our move in May of 2016. So here are some of the challenges that we faced at the time or in the 3.5 years since moving into our split format. Multi-user spaces. Rather than being the landlord, we are now a tenant and a client of spaces that have many competing interests. And that can add a lot of challenge that hadn't previously been part of our how we thought about space. There had been previously an assumption, oh, this is a space, well, of course we've got a corner of a room. Now every time we need a room to paint a large piece of scenery, we have to go through our Rolodex and our virtual Rolodex and find somewhere and arrange it and schedule it and make sure that our needs are being respectful of other people's needs. Informal partnerships. Only a couple of the partnerships that I listed on the previous slide were actually put down on paper. Our arrangement with the Folk Arts Center has always been a conversation. Each interaction, each rental, it has been a conversation rather than a formal contracted agreement. And that brings a lot of challenges. There can be a lot more flexibility, of course, but very often when you are in an informal partnership, my finding has been that that you drop to the bottom of the priority list. So informal partnerships are a challenge. Changing partnership objectives. This one is the leadership of our partners or the mandates of our partners shift, and we have to respond to that because perhaps there is a focus on a different part of their mandate. Right now, for instance, Silver Spire Church is going through a strategic planning process, and we will have to wait to see where the arts fall in their mandate going forward. Similarly, the Folk Arts Center, last winter, we did not use the space for rehearsal because their mandate of community support was prioritized and it was used as an overnight shelter. So there's always the question of does your mission line up? Does our mission line up with their mission enough that we stay a priority? Facility expenses, of course, when you're not the manager of the space, you have very little say in how much things cost. And often we've run into the challenge of rental rate shifts, of rental rates appearing when none had existed before. And when you can't find a space with one of your primary partners, having to pay considerably to find a space in some alternate building. Non-arts partners are a real challenge for arts organizations. We have had a lot of conversations in the last 3.5 years about how we work and about how our use of the space is not what is expected. Um, about how a daytime rental doesn't mean we pack up and disappear at the end of the day if we're in rehearsal, because we need the space continuously and things need to be able to stay in place overnight. So there can't be a second user group in the evening when we're renting the space for rehearsal. Um, there's been a lot of educating done on our part. Coordination of use and communication between groups. This has been one of the largest challenges. Not because of any any group avoiding communication or being willfully difficult, so much as when you are working in multiple spaces and when you are working with groups that have themselves multiple users, the potential for information getting lost is very high. The potential for people being convinced that they sent you an email saying yes or no, but they really didn't, is very high. Or the potential that we thought we asked for a date, but we didn't. So communication of use, communication and coordination there, that was a very steep learning curve for us to make sure that we didn't just assume things were going to work out, that we had to be extremely communicative to the point of possibly being annoying, but it was the best way to overcome any loss of information. And that feeds into access and scheduling. Communicating about when spaces can be accessed, when schedules are working, is there an exception? These were all challenges that all partnerships have involved, from those that have been very smooth to those that have been more rocky. They've all had challenges like this. So to give you an update on where we have ended up, we are still working our administrative offices out of Silver Spire United Church. We also now perform here. They have an auditorium that they are very generous with. When the church's schedule allows, we are able to perform our public community shows here, which is wonderful. It's a non-traditional space, but Carousel has always performed in non-traditional spaces. We tour to schools, so an auditorium or a church gymnasium is exactly what we're comfortable with. We now rehearse in a different space. Suitcase in Point, one of the user groups I mentioned earlier, now operates its own hall, and we rehearse there. It's not the ideal space for us because it's on the third floor of a building with no elevator, but it is the only rehearsal hall in Niagara at this point that is within our price range. The B'nai Israel congregation is a synagogue just outside of downtown that has recently opened its space to us for workshops, which has been a very lucky find in that we weren't even aware they were renting, but somebody in our community said, "Have you ever asked them?" And we did, and they were wonderfully welcoming. And of course, we do continue working with the Folk Arts Center in a different format, maintaining that theater, maintaining our storage space, and running our summer camp. And so it has shifted some, as you can see, but that is the nature of partnership-based space, I've found. We are, however, looking at reunifying. It is very taxing to maintain multiple spaces like this in terms of the time spent coordinating. And also, we do not have a place we can say, come to Carousel Players, because they may go to one of multiple spaces, whether it's an audience member or an artist or anybody working with us. So this is something that we are working on right now with our partners at the Niagara Artists Center, is looking at a cultural commons, much like a tiny version of what they have in Calgary, where there will be spaces for artists of different disciplines, communal spaces to share cost, but most importantly, a home for carousel players where we will all be in the same place. And if you do have any questions, this is my contact information. And if you do have any questions right now, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kate. We do have a question from Kimberly. And before we dive in, everybody who's on the line, I encourage you to type in your questions in the chat box. Your microphones, as you know, aren't or they're muted right now, so we can't hear you. But if you type in your questions, we'll go through them one by one. We have lots of time to discuss. And then at the end, I want to share some new resources that ArtsBuild Ontario is offering right now that I think might be relevant for a lot of the people signed up today. So let's start with the first question. We've got Kimberly Craig. She asked, Kate, while you were discussing communication issues between partners, what have you used?
One of the most useful technologies that we've used is a cloud calendar. So we have a Google Calendar in our case that anybody accessing the space, this is to do with the Folk Art Center, can look at and say, oh, okay, there is something on this calendar. The one thing that that I would recommend is that having that and having they do a system where everything is on there, but only one person posts to it. That having a system where people could put almost like a tentative request and then a confirmation by the facility manager would be useful, because we have found it helpful to go and look and see, oh, is there availability? Yes, there is availability, but then the coordination of space in terms of saying we would like this, and then having it finally show up on the calendar there's often delays in there due to the number of requests.
Great, thanks so much, Kate. Now we've got another one from Joni Carroll at Calgary Arts Development. She asked, how could an organization like the Calgary Arts Development help make this kind of multiple location use easy?
Yeah, I think facilitating partnerships. Another thing that would be very useful is the calendaring, so that groups know what's available. The other is that, and I don't know if this exists, is the ability for companies to, for instance, production shops are often a challenge for arts groups here in Niagara. And so the ability for companies to say, I would like to use a space for this long, and a second company says, yes, I would like this long, and to sort of have a wish list, so that if enough companies came together and said, yeah, we need a production shop for 6 weeks, and this one needs it for that much, and it adds up to the point where maybe they could group together and as a group rent. It's sort of, what are our wish lists?
Great, thank you. while others are kind of thinking about questions to type in, I have so many questions for you, Kate. The first one being, as you know, you're in a lot of different spaces which are mandated by other organizations, and then you have your own mandate as Carousel players, and you are producing your art in their spaces. So my first kind of question that I'd like to explore is, have you run into any challenges about content that has conflicted with any of the mandates of the space?
No, not with our partner organizations. We've run into content challenges with school boards, but none of the groups that we work with have had a problem. In fact, they have been very generous in opening their spaces to us for performances when we have had shows that, for instance, last year we had a show that was not allowed in one school board because for various reasons, I'll just say that. But basically, we weren't allowed to take that into Niagara school boards, and so the Folk Arts Center said, come do performances here. We will not charge you for the space. And we performed for their youth group, and we did a public performance there because the show was about a newcomer Canadian, and they wanted the message out, like they wanted that topic out there. Similarly, the church supported and opened their space for us to do a piece that had been banned because of its content around gender identity. So I think that, frankly, our partners have been very welcoming and open-minded, but more so than some of the rest of the community.
Great, that's great. You know, when we hear about these partnerships with different sectors, especially in the faith sector, working within sacred spaces, there can be challenges between the parish and the arts group occupying the space. So, and then to your point about post-secondary, it sounds like the partnerships that you have, you know, you are supporting one another and it's mutually beneficial to you both. One of the other questions I do have, and Kimberly, I saw you typing, so if you have a question, don't be shy, because I don't want to hog the mic. Oh, there it is. It came in. Kimberly asks, overall, did you prefer owning your own?
I would prefer, my ideal situation would actually be to have a unified space that I rented. I don't particularly think that Carousel would benefit from owning the capital asset of a building, but I would much prefer to be in a space that our company has control over all of it, and especially the scheduling, and that we work with a very supportive and understanding ownership of the building. So whether that's an artscape like co-op, or whatever that group is, that will sort of protect us from the challenges of owning a facility, because I don't want to be having to deal with broken pipes. That's why I like having a landlord sometimes. But I also don't particularly want, I would definitely prefer to have a single space over multiple spaces, having now gone through it and given what we want to do as a company. I think if we were really strictly focused on only producing theater, it would be slightly different. But we do also do arts education. We do also do community outreach, and having that central place that is Carousel is important when you're doing that much work in the community. And
Definitely pros and cons to both models, absolutely. Kimberly, that was one of the questions I had for Kate too, so thank you so much for asking it. I do have one more for you, Kate. And that was when you started to move into these spaces. You were transitioning from one space to three. And I remember in some of our conversations, because Kate has a case study that we're going to share with you at the end of this presentation. And in that case study, you talked about dismantling your stage from the old courthouse and moving it into the cultural center. Can you talk about a little bit about that process and some of the successes and challenges of that move, that physical move that you made in kind of establishing like your
Yes, that process was largely my responsibility because at the time I was production manager, and we established that we were going to move into the lower Robbie, as we call it, which is the lower hall of Robertson Hall, and there was a process where we went in and established that it was smaller and did some drafting as to how to fit it, what we could fit, sorry, because we definitely couldn't fit all of it. There was a gentleman on the board of the Folk Art Center who was an engineer who was great. He came in and he checked out, did a lot of the engineering work on a pro bono basis. So he went in and he checked that the floor would support it. And he checked over the drawing and went, yep, that looks fine. And then we actually contracted a professional crew to come in and be responsible for taking down this fairly large truss structure and then rebuild it. But there was a long delay in the rebuilding because just because of scheduling. Again, scheduling is always the biggest challenge. And so about 6-7 months after we moved out of the courthouse, we moved into the Robbie and rebuilt this very cozy little space, which has now been used with its curtains and lighting setup and sound system. It has been used by a number of community arts groups and cultural groups, which has been very rewarding to see. There's the other thing that we did was we had leftover equipment because we went from a large theater to a small theater, and so I actually sold those capital assets to the Shaw Festival and used that money as the seed to start investigating ways that Carousel can answer some of our current facility challenges. So we've funneled all of the resources back into the facility part of our organization.
I think that's really smart. And I think, investing like for the benefit was for Carousel. So you have kind of that piece of equipment that you're familiar, that your user groups are familiar using. It establishes like a physical connection between you and that organization. So I just think that openness to change within a space that isn't necessarily yours and working together is just a great example for others who are looking for those spaces that are not in a position to own and independently operate to consider as they move forward. I'd like to ask one more final call to everyone if you have any last questions before I move on to some other programs that I think you would like to know about. So just leave some space for those questions to come in if needed. And I think we're good. Okay, so if you think of them, feel free to stop me. But I'm going to move on and let you know about our online training series. So ArtsBuild Ontario, it's our first ever online training series for creative space managers around the topic of capital projects. So we're engaging, we do a lot of our learning series on peer-to-peer learning, which is so great. We learn the successes and challenges of all these unique projects and different models. And this one complements that learning. So we've got topic experts on 4 topics that have been identified by our network through that continual evaluation process. This is the 4 pillars that they're looking to learn about for their capital projects. So we've got our first one coming up, strategic planning and partnerships on November the 14th, 2019. I'll tell you more about that one in a moment. We have financial management and capital projects. That's November 21st, 2019. Capital campaigns and community engagement. That one's December the 5th. And operational planning before, during, and after your project, which is on January 23rd. The cost is $25 plus HST per module, and registration is available on our website under the learning section. So the first one we have coming up, our first module, strategic planning and partnerships. That one is, that should say November the 14th at 1 to 2:30 p.m. This is with Devin Glowinski. He's the co-founder of Kilogram Studios in Toronto, and he is also an urban planner. So he's worked kind of alongside in the same community as the Gladstone Hotel and the Theatre Center. So he's really knowledgeable about that neighborhood evolution over time and how it can change arts and culture, and through the conversations of gentrification as well. This module in particular will introduce participants to concepts that support individual core competencies and their organization's efforts in planning for capital projects at their facilities. So frameworks for partnership development in local communities will also be explored, and some topics specifically that he'll be looking in at are reflection, so identifying your organization's key mandate, program goals and priorities of your facilities and determining what elements are missing, foundations for strategic planning, ideas, concepts, and vision for your desired end state, establishing community partnerships to achieve collective impact, determining what is feasible through early iterations and schematic design, and evaluating potential outcomes and developing a core project team and consultants. So basically all the groundwork you're looking at the beginning of your project. So I encourage you guys to check those out, and if you're able to register, we'd love to see you online for those. The other program I wanted to share with you is our creative space case studies are now available. We released these last week. We have 9 case studies on organizations that have taken on a capital project in the province of Ontario. These are available in both French and English on our website, and we encourage you to check them out. We have 9 great partners. We sat down with leaders who executed these projects or were there present throughout, and partners, and they go through again all of their successes and challenges and the process they went through from the start to finish of their projects, and how they funded it, the ongoing plan, asset management, basically everything under the sun. So we try and capture that all so you can read it and sit down, and thank you to our partners. You can take a look at them there, and yeah, they're there for your consumption. The last program, of course, is Spacefinder. I want to give a shout out to. So Spacefinder across Canada, it's like an Airbnb for creative spaces and artists. So you can go on and list your creative space if it's available to rent. And yes, Joni Carroll, thank you for that shout out. Calgary Arts Development is our local leader in Alberta, and they have the most listings in all of Canada. So we encourage you to check that out. If you have a space, list it. If you're looking for space, search it. And we have 11 instances across Canada, so you can take a look at the list there and see which one is closest to you. At the end of this, I'm going to send out a survey. So again, please fill it out because we like to respond to your issues as they come up. The sector and creative spaces and the needs are always changing. So it helps us provide more programs for you. And just thank you to the Department of Canadian Heritage for funding this webinar and for their generous support of the learning series. And thank you to all of you for joining us. We'll be back with another webinar in November around capital projects, so look forward to that announcement, and of course the learning series. So I hope the rest of you have a great day.